We're always hearing about how AI is going to create this perfect, super efficient future for us. But what if the very code that runs this new world is, well, built on a flawed foundation? That's the core of the AI bias dilemma. And today we're going to unpack it.
All right, so I want you to imagine a country, a place so digitally advanced that they've basically achieved zero bureaucracy. Think about it, a place where all that tedious paperwork is just gone, replaced by seamless, instant online services. Well, that country actually exists. It's Estonia. They are absolute pioneers in digital government. I mean, pretty much every single public service you can think of is online. We're talking personalized medicine, smart traffic systems. Estonia really gives us a sneak peek into what a fully digitized society looks like. And get this, they're not stopping there. They're pushing even further. The goal is to have more than 130 AI applications running in their public sector. And the whole point is to make decisions that are more consistent, more objective, and ultimately more fair. I mean, on the surface, it sounds like the perfect system, right? A digital utopia just humming along on pure logic. But what happens when that logic itself is flawed? What could possibly go wrong? Well, that's where we meet the ghost in the machine, bias. It's this sneaky thing that can creep into our AI systems, a lot of the time without anyone even realizing it's there. And a huge part of the challenge here is that so many of these advanced AI systems are what we call black boxes. So you feed data in, a decision pops out, but what happens in between? That internal logic can be a total mystery, sometimes even to the people who built it. And that begs the question, if you can't see how a decision is being made, how on earth can you be sure it's fair? See, bias isn't just one single mistake. It can get baked in at pretty much any stage of building an AI. It could be in the data you collect in the first place, maybe in how the algorithm is designed, or during the model training process, or even just how it's used out in the real world. Every single one of these steps is a potential doorway for unfairness to slip in. Okay, so we know where bias can sneak in, but what does it actually look like in practice? Let's break down the different ways an algorithm can learn to be unfair. So, at its heart, AI bias is really about systems creating prejudiced outcomes over and over again. But here's the most important thing to get. The AI isn't just making up this prejudice out of thin air. It's really acting like a giant mirror. It learns from and then amplifies all the biases that are already hiding in our historical data, in our societal norms, even in our own quiet, unspoken assumptions. And this bias comes in a few different flavors. First, you've got direct bias. This one's pretty obvious. It's straight-up discrimination, like an algorithm being told to reject female applicants. Then it gets subtler with indirect bias. This is where a rule seems totally neutral on the surface, but in practice, it ends up hurting a specific group disproportionately. And then there's maybe the trickiest one of all, proxy bias. This is when the AI uses something that seems harmless, like your zip code, but that piece of information is actually acting as a stand-in or a proxy for a protected characteristic like race. And believe me, this isn't just some academic theory. Let's look at a really powerful real-world example from the ACLU. They decided to put Amazon's facial recognition software to the test. What they did was they took photos of every single member of the US Congress and ran them against a huge database of criminal mugshots. The result? It was pretty shocking. The AI incorrectly matched 28 members of Congress with criminal records. But that's not even the worst part. The really disturbing part is when you dig into who it got wrong. And this is where the true danger just snaps into focus. The system had an error rate of over 40% for Black and Hispanic individuals. 40%. Meanwhile, for their white colleagues, it was nearly 100% accurate, so the AI wasn't just making mistakes, it was being discriminatory. And why? All because the data it was trained on just wasn't diverse enough. And look, this problem is popping up everywhere. You see it in hiring, where an Amazon AI tool literally taught itself to penalize resumes that had the word women's in them. You see it in welfare systems like in the Netherlands, where a system falsely accused thousands of families of fraud. And in finance, where a lone AI in Finland was denying applications based on things like nationality, gender, and even just living in a rural area. Okay, so the problem is obviously clear, and it's really serious. But it's not a hopeless situation. Far from it. Researchers and developers are actively creating some pretty powerful tools to build fairer AI. So the question is, how do we actually fight back against this? Well, step one is always detection.
right? You can't fix a problem if you can't see it. And that's where bias detection frameworks come in. You can think of them like financial auditors, but for AI. They systematically go through the training data looking for imbalances, and they test how the model performs for all sorts of different demographic groups to pinpoint exactly where and how it's messing up.
So once you've found the bias, you can start to actively fix it or mitigate it. One way is to rebalance the data. So you might add more examples from groups that were underrepresented. Or you can actually tweak the algorithm itself, basically telling it, hey, pay closer attention to these minority groups while you're learning. You can even go so far as to program fairness right into the model's code as one of its main goals. Now, this is where things can get a little tricky because sometimes these fixes create a trade-off. If you push for perfect fairness, you might slightly reduce the model's overall accuracy. Finding that sweet spot, that perfect balance, is honestly one of the biggest challenges in this whole field.
And then there's this really clever technique called adversarial debiasing. The easiest way to think about it is like a game between two AIs. So you have one AI making the decisions. Let's say it's approving loan applications. Then you have a second adversary AI whose only job is to look at those decisions and try to guess the applicant's race or gender. The first AI then gets trained to make its decisions in a way that gives the adversary absolutely no clues to work with. It essentially learns how to become bias blind. So having all these cool tools is one thing, but it leads to a much bigger question. When an AI system does cause real harm, who's actually held accountable? Who is responsible? Well, the truth is, there's no single, easy answer. It's more like a chain of shared responsibility. It really starts with the designers and developers who are writing the code in the first place. Then it extends to the companies or organizations that are actually using the AI. Of course, lawmakers have a role too. They need to create clear rules and oversight. And, it even ends with us, the end users, who have to use our own judgment and step in when we see an AI getting it wrong.
And again, this isn't just a nice idea, it's actually being written into law. You look at major regulations like the EU's AI Act, and they specifically require human oversight for any system that's considered high risk. That ensures there's always a person in the loop when it comes to those really critical decisions.
I think the most important takeaway here is that trustworthy AI doesn't just happen by accident. It has to happen by design. It takes a real conscious effort to build technology that isn't just efficient, but is also equitable and human-centric. And that thoughtful design has to be backed up by continuous monitoring and really clear lines of accountability. Which really leaves us with one last big question to think about. We said before that AI is like a mirror, right? It reflects the data we give it. So as this technology becomes more and more a part of our daily lives, how do we, all of us, make sure it reflects the kind of society we want to live in and not just the flawed one we already have?